Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ace Kennedy, and I'm the National Program Manager for the Reconciliation Program. And on the phone with me, I have Angelina Leite, who is an ABI representative and the capability owner for Reconciliation. And we're about to get started with the webinar. So we just want to emphasize really quick a couple things, re-emphasize. Reconciliation will be deployed in ACE on January 14th, 2016. There was a Federal Register notice that's dated December 12th, 2016 that announces the transition of reconciliation from ACS to ACE. Also, just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on cbp.gov. Oh, darn. Okay. Sorry about that. My slide needs to be changed to 2017. I think that was mentioned before. So I apologize for that. It is 2017. We're not going to hop in the DeLorean and go back in time and go back to January 2016. I did mean 2017. So, again, I always like to show the side-by-side comparison of the changes, what's changing and what's staying the same as far as reconciliation in ACE. The reconcilable issues will remain the same. The time frames remain the same. CBP, one change that is coming is that CBP will no longer blanket flag entry summaries. Now, that capability is not going away. The importer still has the ability to do so, but that needs to be coordinated with their broker or whoever files the reconciliation entries. The trade still cannot add, change, or delete flags. That has not changed. The participation process has changed, as I like to emphasize. On or after January 14th, 2017, it is no longer necessary to file an application with CBP headquarters. The only thing that is required is the same thing that is required today. There has to be an active, valid reconciliation bond writer on file in order to participate. As far as the reconciliation types, the type of entry, aggregate and entry by entry, that remains the same. That is not changing. Data, submitted data, true no change entries. Today, all of that is paper. The header, the association file, the proof of payment, all of that is a paper process and submitted on CDs. When reconciliation is deployed in ACE, that will be an electronic process. All of these changes have been highlighted already in previous webinars and on cbp.gov. What's new in ACE, all of that has been highlighted. I'm just re-emphasizing what has already been stated before. So again, with change recon, entry by entry and everything, the paper, the CDs and all of that, the current process in ACS will go away, and in ACE, it will all be electronic. Also, with the value, duty, taxes, and fees, today the original amounts have to be provided as well as the reconciled amounts. But in ACE, only the reconciled amounts need to be provided. Also, with reports, there was very little to no reports available in ACS. Today, once reconciliation is deployed in ACE, reports will be available. Okay. Also, with locations, today there are 13 reconciliation process ports. Once reconciliation is deployed in ACE, it will be open to all ports. That's all I have. Now I'd like to open up the phone line, we'll open up things for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Or Lena, do you have anything you'd like to add before we go to questions?
No, we can go ahead and go to questions.
Okay.
Okay. First question we have is, when a post-summary correction is filed, the NAFTA recon indicator is removed. Has this been fixed?
So no, they're still working on that issue, and I don't have a date yet when that's fixed. I did ask for an update. I have not gotten one back yet, so I don't have an answer to that yet.
Okay, we'll post any changes to that on ACE Central when we record the webinar. Next question: when there are protests and or FTA recons, will the ACE recon report update data taking into account changes done on the underlying entries?
So it depends on which is filed first. So if the recon entry is filed first and the entries are not yet liquidated, the system will wait till all entries are liquidated for it to become workable for CBP to work on. But it will not know whether or not it's pending a reliquidation based on a protest. So if the protest is filed on an underlying entry after it's been reconciled, then the protest filing will have to make sure that they take into consideration the amounts that were sent on the recon. However, if the protest is filed first on the underlying entry and changes are made on those entries that are protested, in other words, the protest is approved, those changes will reflect the reconciled 09 entry for the original. So again, it depends on which one is filed first.
Okay, Lena, thank you. I have a little two-part question here. Please explain how we go about determining what port to use on our recon filing.
Okay, so
related to that question is, can you also elaborate on the electronic process that will replace the ACS paper process?
Okay, so for the first part, to determine what port. So the filers now can choose what port they want to file their recon. It is the importer's choice as to what port they want to file their recon. They are no longer limited to an assigned processing port come out 14th of January. The system will route the recon to the center that the IR number is assigned to be worked. And if CBP requires to notify or update or call the filer, that is why you send in the filer contact information, the email, and the phone number. CBP will then contact them. But as far as the filer, they can choose what port they want to file the recon. The routing of the recon will be internal and will be sent to the appropriate C team that the IR number belongs to. Now, for the second part of the question, so elaborate the difference between the ACS processing and the ACE processing of a recon. In ACS today, the importer is required to transmit ABI, the header information, and the associated file. So the duties originals and the duties reconciled. They are not required to submit electronically the line item data. That is done through hard copies. So today, the submission of a proper presentation of a recon entry is the header, the associated file, and the line item data, if it's an aggregate. And if it's an entry by entry, header, associated file, plus the associated file duty, taxes, and fees difference, and the line item data, along with a CD. Come January 14th, all of that hard copies that were submitted in ACS to CBP will not be required in ACE. All of the data that was submitted, hard copies, is now EDI transmittable. The filer will transmit the entire header, associated file, duty, taxes, and fees difference if it's an entry by entry, Also, the line item data, what was submitted as a spreadsheet, is now an EDI transmission, and it's called the line item data. All of that will be transmitted EDI. For the purposes of free trade agreement, the filer did not have to give us a country of origin certificate. That was a waiver that we had done years ago through a Federal Register. They were required to give us the statements and declarations, although for the FTA. That is also not required through a hard copy. We have put that in the EDI transmission. So for all FTA recons, the statement and declaration, whether these goods are originated or not, yes or no, all of those are in EDI transmission form. So there is no hard copies to be transmitted or submitted to CBP on an 09 entry come January 14th, all electronic.
Okay, Lena, I have a follow-up to the question you responded to before concerning what port to use on the recon filing. A follow-up questions were, can you provide any guidance on how they choose this port, as the person can see the importer asking for advice on this?
There is no particular format or how they would do it. So they can choose what port they want to file in. Like I said, the working of the recon will be internal and routed to the correct C team. If the importer knows that they belong to a C, they can send it to the port where the C they belong to if they choose to. But our system will automatically send it there or route it there to be worked. So there is no particular format, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Lena, the next question. Today, the importer files an aggregate change recon and applies the value against the entries on the change recon entry. For example, 9,999 entries. In the ACE environment, will the importer now need to report each line on every 9,999 entries?
No, they do not. So the policy still stands. It'll stay the same as ACS. The importer is only required to submit changes. So if I have an entry that has 9,909 entries, and out of those 9,999 entries, only, let's say, 2,000 have changes, then the line numbers within those affected flagged entries will be reported in the line item data. However, the duty, taxes, and fees, if it's an entry by entry, will be reported for all 9,999 entries in the associate file, which stays the same as they had transmitted it in ACS to ACE. So for line item data, only reportable data will be required.
Thank you, Ina. Next question. This is a question relating to the transition from ACS to ACE, a processing scenario. The filer has an entry that is flagged for both NAFTA and value. NAFTA recon is submitted in ACS prior to January 14th. Value recon is submitted in ACE after January 14th. What information is CBP going to be using to compare the duties, fees, taxes at the line level for the value recon when the NAFTA recon was not sent with line level information?
So that is going to have to be a review that is done manual. So if the NAFTA recon was submitted in ACS, the only information that is going to be migrated, because it's only information we have in ACS, would be the duty, taxes, and fees differences and the header level. Since there is no line item data, there is nothing for us to compare it to. So the manual process of review will be on CBP's side. The trade will still transmit the value recon, and they will transmit their reconciled amount based on the approval of the NAFTA recon. And if there were to be any errors at the time of transmission, please contact the ABI client rep. We will then instruct on what to do. But manual reviews will be done by CBP because we do not have the line item data from the NAFTA portion of the recon into ACE.
Thank you very much. Next question. How or why would a value recon be rejected after it was successfully transmitted via ACE?
So the reject is the same as any other entry type. So if CBP rejects a recon in ACE, they would simply reject it. You'll get notifications that the recon has been rejected through a UC message, and then you have the proper time to resubmit the entry with the changes.
Thank you.
And let me add that the time frame still is the same as ACS. For recon purposes, the trade has 30 calendar days to resubmit the rejected recon entry. Apologize for that.
I'll take care of the problem. Okay, next question. Is CBP considering a mechanism to allow importers to flag entries it discovers its brokers have inadvertently failed to file?
So the retroactively flagging mechanism that is in place today will be in place come ACE deployment for recon. The same methodology of filing the request would be the same. The only thing that has changed is who to file it with. ACE, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, what we would have to do is take a look at it to figure out what the best way would be in order to carry out something like this, because CBP still should have some kind of approval with that. So we would have to take a look at that and get back to you. That would have to be a policy decision.
Thank you, ACE.
Okay, next question. Does an importer have to register with a C? If this is not mandatory, is there any good reason to register with the C?
For recon purposes, we are trying to assign all importers to a C. Eventually, all importers will be assigned to a C, from what I understand, but we have several hundred or a couple thousand of importers that are currently approved for recon that have not yet been assigned to a C. We're hoping to have them assigned to a C prior to deployment. If they are not assigned to a C prior to deployment, then the CBP officials who will be working the recons, other than the centers, within the centers that are going to be working recon entries that have importers that have not assigned to them, will be probably by commodity base. But eventually, we should have all importers assigned to a C.
Thank you very much, Lena. Next question. Starting January 14th, 2017, will all types of recon be filed in ACE or just no change filings? Our broker tells us they will only file no changes in ACE starting in January.
Okay, no, so all recon types. The ACS will no longer be the system of record for recon ADI transmission. It will be ACE. So no change, and FTA recon entries will all be in ACE, no longer be in ACS come January 14th.
Thanks, Lena.
Clarification, Lena, by EDI, are we referring to via ABI?
That's correct. Yes, so it's the ADI transmission.
Okay.
It's just electronic database to transmit. So the ADI, it's all transmittable ADI.
Okay, next question. Will electronic documents filed be visible in ACE after submission? Example, how will the importer broker know that all documents have been received?
So there is no initial supporting documentation that needs to be uploaded through ACSIACE for recon purposes, other than if you would like to submit, for example, a cost submission to support the claim of the line item data. You can upload that through ACSIACE and it will be attached to the recon entry. But you do not need to upload, for example, the hard copy of a header or the associated file or an Excel spreadsheet like you used to submit hard copies to the ports when submission of ACSIACE. That is no longer needed. The only thing that you are required to do, and that's if you need to or CBP requests it, is any supporting documentation to support the line item data or the claim for that recon entry. Examples of supporting documents would be the cost submission or the packing list if required, or methodologies of valuation letters, or let's say invoices for certain claims that you're doing. Anything that is not transmittable ABI would be considered supporting documentations, and you can upload those upon transmission of the ABI with the 09 entry.
Thank you, Lena. Next question. PSC on a flagged entry wipes out the recon due date in ACE. Review of the underlying entry in ACE indicates an ACE message, no other recon requirement. Also, the recon flag displays on the entry in ACS, not in ACE. Has CBP received any other information regarding the lack of flags on entries with PSC in ACE?
So again, we're still working on that issue. I have not gotten an update. I do realize that the time is flying, and the deployment of recon and ACE is coming soon. We are working on that issue. I don't have an update today on it.
Okay, thank you. Next, Lena, our ACE. On ACS recon entries, we reported IR tax amounts differently depending on if the underlying entry was liquidated and class code. How are IR tax amounts to be reported in ACE, since we no longer send original amounts?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the scenario of what's happening in ACS on those. For ACS purposes, when there were IRT taxes on entries, the system would not accept the IRT taxes from the filer as originals. They would come out as mismatched, because our system would only populate the IRT taxes upon liquidation of the entry. Because at the time that the IRT taxes were submitted on the underlying entries, time of filing, they were submitted as deferred. They were then paid a month later, and then they become, the class code would change. In ACE, the class code remained the same. We will no longer have that issue that we have in ACS. So whether the flagged entry has been liquidated or not liquidated, that is not going to be an issue. They will populate the IRT taxes as if the paid amounts, not necessarily waiting for the liquidated amount.
Thank you. Next question. Can ACE CBP provide a sample of data in the required CATER format?
So if we're talking about raw data, those examples have already been in our ACE website, or CBP website, under reconciliation. And we have samples of the ABI transmissions of all types of reconciliation, whether it be aggregate, entry by entry, or value classification, and so forth.
Thank you. Next question. Once CBP routes the recon to a processing center, RC, and the filer needs to request a recon be put into reject status, to whom should the recon filer reach out to reject the entry, and how will they know where to mail a check for any differences in duties or fees?
So the filer can reach out to the port that they are stationed at, if you will, and at that port can let them know or inform them of who they need to talk to as to who is handling or processing their reconciliation entry. And as far as the check is concerned, to report any additional duties. If there was additional duties due, you would already have been contacted by the processing port or the processing fee as to whether or not additional monies was needed. Then at that time you would have known or should know where to send that check to.
Okay, next. A correction PSC on a flagged entry wipes out the recon due date in ACS. Will this also occur in ACE?
Yeah. Like I said, we're working on that issue, and it should not occur even now, but we are aware of it and we are working on it.
Okay, thank you. For no reconciled adjustments, is this statement still required? Quote, spreadsheet is not required because there are no adjustments to any reportable data elements in this reconciliation. Close quote. Is it EDI transmittable?
Okay, so the mere fact of submitting a no change recon, so the way it was developed, the no change recon will be an aggregate and only an aggregate. There's no choice between entry by entry or aggregate. So the no change recon is a no change with no reportable duties, tax, and fees or value changes, and can only be transmitted as an aggregate. The CATER is written so that that statement that there's no reportable adjustment is included within a ABI transmission of a no change recon. So you, the trade, does not have to send that statement in because it's embedded in the no change recon already.
Thank you. Next question. When there are multiple reconciliations, example, one value, one no value, the original in the second recon should be the amounts after taking the first recon into consideration. Will the original pull correctly whether or not the first recon has liquidated? Should the filer wait for the first recon to liquidate before filing the second recon?
They do not need to wait till it's liquidated. So if a NAFTA, let's say a free trade agreement recon was filed first, and then a value is filed second, the free trade agreement will pull the original as the liquidated amounts for the underlying entries. When the value recon is filed, it will pull the reconciled amounts of the free trade agreement to become original for the purposes of the value recon. So it will talk to each other, the two entries, for the purpose of the line item data and the associated file with the duty, tax, and fees.
Very good. Thank you, Lena. Next, how does the trade address FP&F notice of liquidated damages issued due to no file reconciliation?
I believe that's a question for fines, penalties, and forfeitures, but I do know that the liquidated damages will still be assessed for recons for no files, late files, no money, et cetera, et cetera. You will still get a notice from fines, penalties, and forfeitures, and you will address it based on the instructions of, I believe it's the 5955A.
Okay, thank you. If the entry, next question, if the entry is not flagged, is there a time limit to go back and flag it, i.e. before payment date, or can it be flagged after payment entry date?
Okay, so if the underlying entry or entry type 01 is transmitted and it's before the print date of the statement, which the entry still is in trade status, the filer can retransmit that entry and flag it. If it's past the statement print date and now becomes CBP status, the filer cannot retransmit and flag that entry. However, they can ask for the entry to be rejected, and at the rejection, they can retransmit and flag the entry at that time. If there are, let's say, 1,000 entries due to a system failure within the filer's system, they can still ask for retroactively flag for those entries. Again, those are very specific limited times and reasons why CDP would approve that. Most often than not is because of a system failure. Now, the time frames for those to be flagged by CDP, they have to be flagged prior to the underlying entries being liquidated. ACE, can you comment on the future liquidation for retroactively flagging?
Well, we're still trying to explore a couple things that we've noticed with our system, but you can still submit the request. And just to reemphasize, the underlying entries cannot be liquidated. The flags can be removed on liquidated entries, but they cannot be added to liquidated entries.
Great. Thank you, ACE.
Thank you. Next question. Assuming there will no longer be recon program acceptance letters from headquarters, how can a filer know once an importer of record has a valid recon rider? Can a query be created for this purpose?
So the importer should be able to go into his account and know that they've got a recon bond rider because they have requested it. It would be in their importer account. If the importer gives access to their broker as a proxy to look at their account, they would be able to see that. So you really need to rely on your importer for that information. Now, as far as doing a query, or let's say an importer query to see if they have bonds, you could do that as well if you have the access to do that or the power of attorney for that importer of record.
Thank you. Next question. How long will iTrack reports remain available, and will there be a comparable recon to do report in ACE?
So we had said in the past that the iTrack report would go away come the deployment of ACE Recon. However, the ACE Recon reports will not be available come deployment date of the ACE Recon. So we are going to leave the iTrack reports and the master extract reports, liquidated and unliquidated reports from Indy, available to the trade until the ACE Recon reports become available to the trade. We need a few weeks after deployment to test the Recon ACE report with live data in order to know that the ACE reports are working properly for Recon purposes. Until those ACE reports are available, tested and completed, then we will do away with the iTrack or the master extract reports or come up with a different update on what we're going to do with those reports. But meanwhile, they will stay in place until further notice.
Thank you, Lena. Next question. When CBP pulls the original into the recon, it will pull the latest entry summary information, including if any PSCs were transmitted. Does this matter if the PSC was acted on, agreed with, or if CBP liquidated in agreement or not with that PSC?
Okay. So that's a very good question. So if the entry has been reconciled, so there's two parts to this. So an underlying entry that is flagged can have a PSC filed against it, but it can only be, a PSC can only be filed against it prior to the reconciliation of the flagged issue. If the importer reconciles the flagged issue prior to the lapse of the 270-day PSC filing, the filer or the importer has no right anymore to follow the PSC once it's been reconciled, even though their 270 days has not yet come and gone. So you want to make sure that you follow all your PSCs on an underlying entry before you reconcile it. Now, if the PSC has been filed but has not yet been worked, by the reviewing officer and a recon has been filed against that underlying entry, the recon does not become workable for visualization to the reviewing officer until the underlying entries have been liquidated. So it will run through its process of the PSC and its liquidation process of that PSC. Once that liquidation has been done, it will post the original liquidated amounts for the purposes of recon for the recon to become workable. So we will always get the latest originals on those underlying entries.
Okay, thank you, Lena. I hope I'm getting this next question accurately. Has CBP corrected the bond number not same due to an internal issue?
Yes, the question I understand. There's an issue right now with the bond not being the same. So that issue will not be corrected. That issue is in ACS. We are not making corrections in ACS. All our time is put into the ACE program, so we're not going back to ACS. And since we only have a few weeks left, we're definitely not going back and correcting that in ACS. However, that issue will not exist when we go live for submission of 09 entries in ACE. That issue only exists in ACS.
Thank you, Lena. Next question, a person joined in a little late, wants to clarify a question as to when should the trade start flagging the entries? Is there a specific date in January, or can we start doing it anytime?
Okay, so for flagging purposes, that has never stopped. So whether the entry was filed in ACS or the entries are filed in ACE, all flaggings are done at the ABI transmission of the entry summary for entry types 1, 2, and 6. That's when the flagging takes place. So there is no other time for the entries to be flagged as far as the filer for the ABI transmission. It all is done at the ABI transmission of the entry summary. So they all should be flagged by now, or entries that have already been submitted to CBP should have already been flagged.
Thanks, Lena.
Mm-hmm.
I missed that first question. Okay, next question. The person asking the question states that we import watches. Do the data samples on cbp.gov reflect instances where the main heading has multiple subheadings, such as 9102.11.25 with subheadings 9102.11.2510, .2520, .2530, and 2540 for the movement, case, strap, and battery?
Okay, so the way the system works is that in the manner that the 01 entry, and I'll take the example of an 01 entry, in the manner that the 01 entry was submitted for that particular line. So if the line number of an 01 entry for watches has multiple ACSs on one line item, that is exactly how it's going to be reported on the line item data for the 09 entry, because it will validate whether that line item exists or not. In the ACS submission of an 09 entry, we know that it's an Excel spreadsheet, and the HTSs are just listed as to, 9802, 91 chapters, 61 chapters, so forth, so forth. For ACE purposes, the ABI transmission for the line item data will be exactly how it's transmitted on the line item for that underlying entry, and then the grouping thereof. So if you have 1,000 entries on an ACE recon, and those 1,000 entries happen all to be watches entries, and line number for each of those entries has the same HTSs, that is how it's going to be reported on the line item data for recon purposes. You basically will have only one line, if you will, on the recon entry because it will encompass the sum of all the underlying line numbers for those flagged entries.
Thank you, Lena. The next question is my software has a box to check for electronic signature. Is this a requirement, and what does it mean?
Yes, so it is a requirement for ACE 2. So that is just an electronic signature for the submission of the ACE entry saying that you submitted this entry. So it's the same as the consumption entry. We did not change that for recon, same purpose.
Thank you. Next question. Does CBP anticipate payment of additional duties via ACH to eliminate paper check submissions by couriers?
So for the first-time payment of a payment methodology, if you will, for 09 entries, you have a choice of statement and whether it be credit or debit, and you also have a choice of statement, whether it be money orders, cash, check, or what have you, and then you have the method of payment for single transaction payment. Regardless of the method of payment on the initial transmission, if there is an additional money owed on a recon entry, the only method of payment will be single transaction payment. There is no ACH on an additional payment to an existing recon entry.
Okay, thank you. Lena, next question. If we need to request an extension on a recon entry, do we still submit a letter, or is that request available electronically in ACE?
No, that is not something that we have electronically in ACE. So the request to withhold liquidation is still valid for 09 entries, and the method of requesting the withhold liquidation is still the same as it was in ACS. The importer will have to submit a letter to request that withhold of liquidation for that recon.
Okay, next question. Several example recon entries have incorrect payable amounts. It appears that the recon entries were created using copy-paste from other recon entries, and thus that is why they were wrong. Will these be fixed?
If we're talking about the examples that we have on our website, those are just examples so that you can see where the elements of the fields go and what is required there. Some of the additions and subtractions may be incorrect, but it's just to make you aware where the fields go and what is required depending on the type of recon that is being filed. So we are aware that some of the additions are incorrect, but please use them as to show where the fields go and what information is required in those fields.
Okay, thank you, Lena. Will the filer know who to contact to request an entry to be rejected to retroactively flag the entry? For example, will they know to contact the C or port?
Well, so to flag, we're talking about the underlying entry, the 1, 2, or 6 entry type. So you should know where you followed that consumption entry or what processing port that came from. And that's the port that you would contact for the rejection of that underlying entry.
Okay, thank you. None of the recon entry examples show interest being calculated. Thus, those examples, I've got a block here. I can't read all. Those examples, I got a block. Those examples with the payable amount are not correct. Will this be fixed?
Okay, so the examples that we have posted, we did not show examples of calculated interest for any of those examples, but yet they are required when you send them in live. So we did not put anything with interest calculations on there. The interest calculations are done manually by the filer or the importer. And again, the interest calculations are done on a quarterly basis based on the IRS interest calculations that are posted to our CBP website. So we do not take that interest calculations in place when we did the examples of the recon transmissions to be posted to the trade. But they are required.
Thank you, Ina. Next question. We file recon for both value and free trade. Do we have to file the free trade recon first and then the value recon later? Can we file value recon before free trade?
Well, there is no policy, if you will, which one you have to file first. But I would suggest that the FTA recon be filed first. And the reason why I say that is to establish the SPI indicator so that when the value recon is submitted, that if it's an increase in value, the duties, tax, and fees owed to CBP would be much less because an establishment of an SPI indicator would mean either a reduced duty rate or a free rate of duty. However, it's up to the trade to decide which one they want to file first. But FTA would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If you've received approval for recon, however, have not started flagging, is this an issue?
So if you received approval for participating to recon, it is up to you. The recon program or recon prototype program is a voluntary program. So even though you've already requested to be part of the recon participation, you're only really participating at the time you flagged entry. So even if you have a recon bond writer today and your account is turned on to yes for recon participation eligibility, until you start flagging and you decide when you start flagging, then that's when you truly are required to submit an 09 entry.
Okay, thank you, Lena. Next question. When a PSC is filed on a flagged entry in ACE, our system retransmits the recon flag. I noticed that this changed the recon due date on the underlying entry identified on the iTrack report. Does this also change the recon due date in ACE?
I was not aware that that date changes when you get the iTrack report, but it does not change in ACE. So the calculations of validations within the ACE system is that it counts 21 months exactly from the summary date of the ACE entry summary, whether it be entry type 1, 2, or 6. If somebody can send me an example of that, I would appreciate it. Whoever asked that question, my email is Angelina, ANGELINA T as in Tom, E, at cdp.gov. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Next question. Does the deflagging issue affect only entry summaries with PSCs or also those with protest?
No, we found no issues of protested entries that remove flags. And just to clarify, though, the PSC removal of the flags is not happening to all entries. It is a hit and miss, and so that's why we're looking into it. So it's not all PSC filings.
Okay. Next question. If an importer has a blanket flag on file, will CBP continue to flag the entries through January 13, 2017? Then starting on January 14th, the blanket flagging will be done by the broker.
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
However, I just want to add that if you want blanket flagging after on or after January 14th, you must set that up with your broker. It's not going to be an automatic process. You have to inform your broker and work with them and coordinate with them in order to have that capability.
Okay, and the next question just builds on this. It's again concerning blanket flagging currently being done by CBP. Will stop when the trade, let me rephrase this. I was wondering about when blanket flagging currently being done by CBP will stop and when we, the trade, should start flagging the entries.
So it'll stop on the 13th of January, I believe, 11:59 p.m. if I'm correct, Ace. And the
Correct.
filer, thank you. And the filer will start flagging entries after that time frame on the 14th of January.
Okay. Next question. The questioner is in the IMMC located in Buffalo. However, our C contacts are located in Texas and California. Our C contacts do not have any recon experience. Which port should we submit our recon to? Buffalo, Dallas, San Diego, or should we continue to submit to Champlain where our original recon was assigned?
Okay, so as an importer, you can choose which port to follow your recon. Internally, CBP will route that recon to a C team. Now, all C teams have, in my understanding, has an expert for recon assigned to them. However, when the recon is routed to the C, they will then route it to a port or a C member or what have you who will be assigned to work that recon.
Thank you, Ina. Another little housekeeping question. Is there a helpline where I can get more information? The ACE help desk always seems overwhelmed.
We have the contact that we have for the email address. It's the OT dot. Can you repeat that for them, please?
Sure. We have the OT recon folder, and that email address is ot-reconfolder@cbp.dhs.gov. But I would like to encourage you, if you have a question, while we have the forum here, you may type it in and we can try and answer it for you.
Thank you, Ace.
Thank you. Next question. If we have a no-change recon, but cannot file it as entry by entry and must file it as aggregate, will we not be able to claim drawback later on those underlying entries?
Okay, so that's a good question. So for drawback purposes, here's what drawback is. You can file a drawback on any entry, you can file a drawback on any flagged entry, whether that flagged entry was reconciled through an aggregate or an entry by entry. Now, what the difference is, whether filing an aggregate or an entry by entry, is the difference will be either reported for drawback purposes or not, depending on the methodology of filing. So for an entry by entry flagged entry, what you can include on a drawback would be all of the original data, values, and so forth from the underlying entry, in addition to the additional value that you reported on an entry-by-entry recon. If that flagged entry was processed through an aggregate recon, and there was value changes, you forfeit that right to the additional value, if you will, on that aggregate recon. But you still have rights to the value of the original flagged entry. Now, if you file a no-change recon for that flagged entry that you later want to do a drawback, you can. Now, by default, because it's a no change, you have no reportable data or value change on that recon. So that portion does not get filed for drawback. You still keep your right to drawback on the flagged entry for the portion that is still in the underlying entry at the time of filing. So the answer to your question is yes, but it's only what can you file for drawback in addition to what's already included on the underlying entry at the time of filing.
Okay, thank you, Lena. Next question. When the trade submits a 520D or protest, the size limit is 10 megabytes. Why is the submission of recon limited to less megabytes?
I'm going to try to answer this question, but I'll try to get a better answer. But the 4 megabytes is what we have in place today. We've had that in place for a while. So what can happen is that the filer can submit a recon larger than the 4 megabytes, but they would have to submit it in portions. And then CBP will receive it as a whole document. That's how it was explained to me. If you require additional details on that, please email me and I'll try to get those details to you. But that was my understanding on how the system works.
Okay, thank you, Lena. Has CBP notified importers with blanket flags that CBP will no longer blanket flag their entries and to notify their brokers?
Yes, we have. We've already sent out a Federal Register. Ace, can you elaborate on the date that Federal Register was posted?
The Federal Register notice was posted December 12th, 2016. We also issued the ACE Reconciliation Handbook, a guide to compliance, which stated that blanket flags would no longer be added after the deployment of reconciliation in ACE. We've hosted several webinars stating that. We've mentioned it on the trade call, so we have notified the trade.
Thank you, Ace.
Thank you. Next question. Can my broker, Broker A, set a blanket flag that will apply to entries filed by another broker, Broker B?
I believe that is a question to the broker, but I can probably say no, they can't. They won't have access to that. So if an importer goes to 5 different brokers, as an example, they will have to notify the 5 different brokers to flag all of their entries regardless of the entry processing port.
Okay, we have a question, a follow-up question related to the question we had about the multiple HTS codes for watches, Lena.
Okay.
And, the person didn't really understand the answer completely and didn't want to take up too much time here, so could he just send that question to you or Ace?
Yes, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Can we flag a recon transactionally while there is a blanket flag in effect? Need to know for testing purposes to ensure everything is compliant by the deadline.
Okay, so if I understand the question correct, the IR number has an approved blanket flag, and I'll use the issue of value. So the question is, can I still transmit an ABI 01 entry when the IR number has a blanket approval flagging and indicate an entry-by-entry flagging for that same issue? The answer is yes.
Thank you very much, Ace.
Well, thank you all so much. We have about 1 minute left, so we have time for maybe one more question. But I also want to encourage you to go on cbp.gov and take a look and see what's new with ACE and to read the Federal Register notice as it pertains to reconciliation. And if we don't have any more questions, I'd just like to say happy holidays to everyone, and we will probably resume these calls after the new year, after the deployment, but the dates will be determined, and once we determine that, we will advise you of those dates through a CSMS message. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you.